On Christmas Day in 1887, a widower opens his door and is stunned to find his male bride, skinny, exhausted, in rags. The town mocks her. He almost rejects her, but his little daughter sees what he doesn't, and one night, when he hears a cry, this man's heart breaks, and then finally opens. Stay tuned to the end of this story and comment what town you're viewing from, so I know how far the story goes. The wind came hard across the Wyoming plains that Christmas Eve, carrying with it the bite of winter and the weight of memory. It rattled the shutters of Caleb Rourke's ranch house and sent dust devils spinning across the frozen ground where nothing green had grown since October. The sky hung low and gray, pregnant with snow that refused to fall, and the air tasted of iron and ice. Inside the cabin, Caleb stood at the stove, stirring a pot of thin stew that would have to stretch for supper. His hands were rough and scarred from 2 years of working the ranch alone, and his shoulders carried a permanent hunch from the weight of grief he'd never quite managed to set down. At 34, he looked older, lines etched deep around his eyes, silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. "Papa, is she really coming today?" 6-year-old Lily sat at the kitchen table, her small hands folded in front of her, blonde curls escaping from the braid he'd managed that morning. Her blue eyes, so heartbreakingly like her mother's, fixed on him with that mixture of hope and fear he'd come to know too well. "That's what the letter said, sweetheart." Caleb kept his voice steady, though his gut churned with uncertainty. "Should be on the afternoon stage." "What if she doesn't like me?" Caleb crossed to the table and knelt beside his daughter's chair, tucking a loose curl behind her ear. "Lily girl, that's impossible. You're the finest thing in this whole territory." "Mama liked me," Lily whispered, her small voice cracking. "But she still left." The words hit Caleb like a fist to the chest. He pulled Lily into his arms, feeling her small body tremble against him. "Your mama didn't want to leave, baby. She got sick. That wasn't her choice, and it surely wasn't because of you." But Lily had been only 4 when fever took Sarah, and 4-year-olds didn't understand the difference between death and abandonment. For 2 years, Caleb had watched his daughter withdraw, growing quieter and more fearful with each passing season. She flinched when he raised his voice. She cried when he left for town. She woke screaming from nightmares where everyone she loved disappeared into darkness. He'd tried. God knew he'd tried. But a man working a ranch alone had no time for gentle words and patient explanations. Meals needed cooking, stock needed tending, fences needed mending. By the time he finished each day's work, he barely had energy to tuck Lily into bed, much less heal the wounds grief had carved into her small heart. That's why he'd answered the advertisement. That's why, 3 months ago, he'd sat at this same table and written to the Ladies' Correspondence Society in Boston, requesting a bride. Not for himself, he'd loved Sarah with everything he had, and that part of him had died with her. But for Lily, a child needed a mother. A home needed a woman's touch. And if he couldn't give his daughter back what she'd lost, maybe he could at least give her someone to fill the silence. The woman who'd written back called herself Nora Hale. Her letters had been brief, almost sparse. She could read and write. She could cook and sew. She was 26 years old and unmarried. She'd asked no questions about his finances or property. She'd made no demands. She'd simply agreed to come. Caleb had sent money for her passage 2 months ago, and now, on Christmas Eve, she was due to arrive. "Come on, Lily girl." He stood, lifting her with him. "Let's get you bundled up. Stage should be here within the hour." They dressed in layers against the cold, Lily in the wool coat Sarah had sewn 3 winters ago, already too small but still serviceable, and Caleb in his heavy sheepskin jacket. He settled his hat low and took Lily's hand, and together they stepped out into the bitter afternoon. The ranch sat 3 miles outside of Salvation, Wyoming, a town of perhaps 200 souls clustered around a main street of false-fronted buildings that promised more than they delivered. The Rourke land stretched across 500 acres of rough prairie, good for cattle but hard on everything else. The house itself was solid, 2 bedrooms, a main room with kitchen and sitting area, and a loft where Lily slept. Caleb had built it with his own hands during his first year here, back when Sarah was still alive and everything still felt possible. Now it just felt empty. The ride into town took 20 minutes, the wagon rattling over frozen ruts while Lily huddled against his side. Other homesteads dotted the landscape, The Hendersons' place with its sagging barn, the Pruitt spread where smoke rose from the chimney in a thin gray line. Caleb saw no one. Most folks were inside on Christmas Eve, gathered with family around warm fires. He'd have given anything to be one of them. Salvation's main street lay quiet when they arrived. Just a few horses tied at the hitching posts and lamplight beginning to glow in windows as dusk approached. Caleb pulled the wagon up in front of the general store and helped Lily down, then led her toward the stage office. "Caleb Rourke, as I live and breathe." He turned to find Margaret Hendricks standing in the doorway of her husband's mercantile, arms crossed over her ample bosom, eyes sharp with curiosity. Margaret made it her business to know everyone else's business, and she'd been pecking at Caleb like a persistent crow ever since word got out that he'd sent for a mail-order bride. "Mrs. Hendricks," Caleb touched his hat brim politely, trying to move past. "Picking up your new wife, are you?" Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Must be quite something, a woman willing to travel all this way to marry a man she's never met. Makes one wonder what she's running from." Caleb felt Lily's hand tighten in his. "Makes one wonder why some folks can't mind their own affairs," he replied evenly. Margaret's smile sharpened. "Oh, I'm just concerned, Caleb, for you and that precious girl. You've been through so much, losing Sarah like you did. Would be a shame to bring trouble into your home." "I appreciate the concern." He didn't. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I heard she's from back east." Margaret stepped closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "Boston area. You know what kind of women end up in those bride catalogs, don't you? The desperate ones, the ones with questionable pasts, the ones no decent man would—" "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Hendricks." Caleb's voice went cold as the wind. "Come on, Lily." He guided his daughter away, feeling Margaret's stare burning into his back. Damn the woman and her poisoned tongue. Damn the whole town, really. Every busybody and gossip who'd made it their mission to speculate about his life. The stage office was warmer, heated by a pot-bellied stove that glowed red. Chester Waits, the agent, looked up from his desk and nodded. "Caleb? Here for the Boston stage?" "That's right. It on time?" "Near enough. Should roll in any minute now." Chester studied him with rheumy eyes. "You sure about this, son? Taking in a stranger?" "Not a stranger if we've been writing back and forth." "Letters ain't the same as knowing a person." Chester pulled out a pipe and began packing it with tobacco. "Sarah was a good woman. Fine woman. Hate to see you settle for less just because you need help with the little one." Caleb's jaw tightened. "With respect, Chester, my decisions are my own." "Just saying, you're a young man still. Decent property, good name. You could find yourself a proper wife if you took time to court someone local." "I don't want to court anyone." The words came out harsher than he'd intended. "I want someone to help raise my daughter and keep my house. That's all." Chester shrugged and lit his pipe. "Well, you'll have your answer soon enough. Here comes the stage now." Through the window, Caleb saw the coach rolling up the street, its team of 4 horses breathing steam into the frigid air. His heart began to pound, though he couldn't say whether from anticipation or dread. Beside him, Lily pressed close, her small face pale. "It's all right, sweetheart," he murmured. "Everything's going to be all right." He hoped to God he was telling the truth. The stage pulled to a stop in a cloud of dust and frozen breath. The driver climbed down, stretching his back and stamping his feet, while his partner began unloading luggage from the roof. 2 passengers emerged first, a traveling salesman Caleb recognized from previous visits, and an elderly woman who was met by her son. Then a third figure appeared in the coach doorway. Caleb's first thought was that there had been some mistake. The woman who stepped down from the stage couldn't possibly be Nora Hale. She was too thin, too worn, too obviously exhausted. Her dress, a faded gray wool that might once have been blue, hung loose on her frame and was stained with travel dust. Her coat was threadbare, patched at the elbows, with buttons that didn't match. She carried no luggage except a small carpet bag that looked as worn as she did. But when she turned and her eyes met his across the street, he knew. She had the same eyes she'd described in her letters, gray-green, like the sea before a storm. Her face was narrow, too pale, with sharp cheekbones that spoke of missed meals. Dark hair escaped from beneath a hat that had seen better days. She couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds, and she swayed slightly as she stood, gripping the coach door for balance. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Then Lily tugged his hand. "Papa, is that her?" Caleb couldn't find his voice. He nodded. The woman, Nora, straightened her shoulders and began walking toward them. Each step looked like it took effort, but she held her head high. As she drew closer, Caleb could see more details he wished he couldn't. The hollows beneath her eyes, the chapped roughness of her hands, the way her dress hung empty where it should have filled out. This wasn't just a woman who'd had a hard journey. This was a woman who'd been struggling for a long time. "Mr. Rourke?" Her voice was soft but steady. "Yes." He removed his hat. "Miss Hale?" "Mrs. Hale, actually." A flicker of something, pain, regret, crossed her face. "I was married once. He died 3 years ago. I should have mentioned that in my letters, but I thought it might not matter." "It doesn't." Caleb wasn't sure what else to say. Behind him, he could feel Chester watching. Across the street, he saw curtains moving in shop windows. The whole town would be talking by nightfall. Nora's gaze dropped to Lily. Her expression softened. "And you must be Lily. Your father's letters spoke of you often. He says you're very brave." Lily edged out from behind Caleb's leg, studying Nora with solemn intensity. "You're really skinny." "Lily," Caleb's face flushed. "That's not polite." But Nora smiled, a real smile that transformed her tired face into something almost pretty. "It's quite all right. You're very observant. I've been traveling for 9 days, and coach food isn't very filling. Perhaps when we get home you could help me find something more substantial to eat?" Lily considered this. Then, to Caleb's shock, she reached out and took Nora's hand. "We made stew. Papa's not very good at cooking, but it's warm." "That sounds absolutely perfect." Caleb watched his daughter's small hand disappear into Nora's thin one, and something twisted in his chest. He couldn't name the emotion. It wasn't quite relief, wasn't quite fear. Maybe it was just the recognition that there was no turning back now. "I'll get your luggage," he said roughly. "This is all I have." Nora lifted the carpet bag slightly. "I'm afraid I traveled light." Light. The word felt like an understatement. The woman had arrived with literally nothing but the clothes on her back and a bag that couldn't have held more than a change of dress and some personal items. What kind of circumstances drove a person to such desperate straits? But he'd asked for a bride, and one had come. That was the arrangement. He'd promised in his letters to provide for her, and he would. Whatever her past, whatever her reasons for coming, she was here now. And breaking their agreement would mean disappointing Lily, which he couldn't bear to do. "The wagon's this way," he said. They walked back through town in silence, Nora moving slowly, still holding Lily's hand. Caleb saw the stares, heard the whispers. He saw Margaret Hendricks standing in her doorway, eyes wide with barely concealed glee. He saw Thomas Pruitt outside the saloon, shaking his head with something like pity. Let them stare. Let them whisper. None of them knew what it was like to watch your daughter cry herself to sleep every night, to feel your house grow colder with each passing day, to wonder if you were failing at the one thing that mattered most. He helped Nora into the wagon, noting how light she was, how carefully she moved. Lily scrambled up beside her, chattering now about the ranch, about their horse tucker, about how Papa had promised they could have a Christmas tree tomorrow. As Caleb took up the reins, he caught Nora's eye. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude, maybe, mixed with wariness, or maybe just bone-deep exhaustion. "It's about 20 minutes, he said. "Not a comfortable ride." "After 9 days on the stage, Mr. Rourke, I assure you nothing could be uncomfortable." Her voice held a trace of dry humor. "Though I confess I'll be grateful to stop moving." He clicked his tongue at the horses, and they started forward. The wind had picked up, cutting through even his heavy coat. He glanced at Nora and saw her shivering despite her attempts to hide it. Her thin coat was no match for Wyoming winter. Without thinking, he reached behind the seat and pulled out the blanket he kept there. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "Wrap up." She took it with another of those unreadable looks. "Thank you." "Papa always keeps blankets," Lily announced proudly. He says prepared people don't freeze. Your papa sounds very wise. He is. He built our whole house himself and our barn, and he can fix anything that breaks. Caleb felt heat rise in his face. Lily, I'm sure Mrs. Hale doesn't need a full accounting of my skills. But she should know, Lily insisted, so she knows she's in a good place. Nora smiled gently. I'm quite sure I am, sweetheart. The ranch came into view as dusk settled in earnest, the house standing dark against the gray sky. It had never looked so small or so stark. Caleb saw it suddenly through Nora's eyes. The weathered boards, the simple structure, the vast emptiness of the surrounding land. What must she think, coming from Boston to this? He pulled the wagon up beside the house and jumped down, then helped Nora descend. She stumbled slightly, catching herself against the wagon wheel, and he saw her wince. You all right? Yes, just my legs fell asleep during the ride. They do that now. She straightened with visible effort. I'll be fine in a moment. Lily had already run ahead and thrown open the front door. Come see, she called. We have a real window with glass and everything. Nora followed slowly, and Caleb brought up the rear, carrying her pathetic little carpet bag. As they stepped inside, he tried to see the interior through a stranger's eyes. It was clean, he kept it that way, but sparse. The main room held a table with 4 chairs, a wood stove, a few shelves with dishes and supplies. 2 rocking chairs sat near the fireplace, though one hadn't been used since Sarah died. The bedroom doors stood open, showing neatly made beds but little else. It's warm, Nora said softly. And clean. That's more than I expected. More than she expected. What kind of life had she been living? The bedroom on the left is yours, Caleb said, pointing. It's not large, but it has a bed and a chest for your things. The other is mine. Lily sleeps in the loft. He paused. I should say straight out, this arrangement doesn't include, that is, we're not, what I mean is, you want a housekeeper and a mother for Lily, Nora said calmly. Not a wife in the traditional sense. I understood that from your letters, Mr. Rourke. It's one of the reasons I accepted. Relief flooded through him. Good. That's good. I just wanted us to be clear. Perfectly clear. She set down her bag on her sum. Now, Lily mentioned something about stew. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Nora insisted on helping, despite her obvious exhaustion, moving around the kitchen with practiced efficiency. She tasted Caleb's stew, added some dried herbs from a tin in her bag, and somehow made it taste better without seeming to do much at all. She set the table with the precision of someone who'd done it thousands of times. She poured water for washing up, and when Lily spilled hers, she cleaned it without fuss or scolding. Caleb watched from his chair by the fire, supposedly reading but really just observing. She moved like someone accustomed to making herself useful, to staying out of the way, to anticipating needs before they were spoken. But she also moved like someone in pain, favoring her left leg slightly, pressing a hand to her back when she thought no one was looking. When they finally sat down to eat, Lily chattered enough for all 3 of them, telling Nora about her favorite doll, about the chickens they kept, about how Papa had promised to teach her to ride properly come spring. Nora listened with genuine attention, asking questions that made Lily glow with importance. Caleb ate in silence, his mind churning. What had he done? He'd brought a stranger into his home, into his daughter's life, and he knew nothing about her except what she'd written in a handful of letters. She could be anyone. She could have any kind of past. She could be dangerous or crazy or... Mr. Rourke? He looked up to find Nora watching him, those sea storm eyes steady and calm. Yes? I want to thank you, she said quietly, for taking a chance on me. I know this must be strange for you. It's strange for me too, but I promise I'll work hard. I'll earn my place here. You won't regret this. The words were simple, but something in her voice caught him, a thread of desperation carefully controlled, a hint of past pain carefully buried. You don't need to earn anything, he said, though he wasn't entirely sure he meant it. We had an agreement. I'll keep my part if you keep yours. Then we understand each other. She turned back to her bowl. This stew is quite good, by the way, better than anything I've eaten in a long time. After supper, Nora excused herself to her room, pleading exhaustion. Lily helped Caleb wash the dishes, then he tucked her into bed in the loft, listening to her prayers. "God bless Papa," Lily whispered, eyes squeezed shut. "And God bless Nora. Please let her stay. Please don't let her get sick like Mama. Please let her like me enough to stay." Caleb kissed her forehead, his throat tight. "Sleep now, sweetheart." He climbed back down the ladder and found himself alone in the main room. From behind Nora's closed door came no sound. He wondered if she was sleeping, or if she lay awake in that narrow bed, wondering what she'd gotten herself into. He knew he should feel something, relief that help had arrived, hope that Lily might heal, something. Instead, he just felt numb. And beneath the numbness, a growing unease. Because Margaret Hendricks had been right about one thing. What kind of woman ended up in a bride catalog? What kind of circumstances drove someone to travel 2,000 miles to marry a stranger? And what would the town say when they saw her in the full light of day, saw how thin she was, how worn, how obviously desperate? He'd asked for a bride. Instead, he'd gotten a ghost. Caleb banked the fire and checked the doors, then retreated to his own room. He didn't sleep well that night. The wind howled around the house, and through the thin walls, he thought he could hear soft crying from the room next door. But when he rose and pressed his ear to the wood, he heard only silence. Maybe he'd imagined it, or maybe Nora Hale was better at hiding her tears than his daughter was. Either way, it was done now. She was here. And come morning, they would begin the business of learning to be a family, or at least learning to live under the same roof without destroying each other. Outside, the first snow began to fall, soft and silent, covering the frozen ground in white. Christmas morning was coming, whether any of them were ready for it or not. Well, the house woke slowly on Christmas morning. Caleb rose before dawn as always, habit pulling him from restless sleep. He dressed quietly and emerged from his room to find the fire already burning and Nora standing at the stove, fully dressed despite the early hour. "You're up," he said, surprised. She turned, and in the lamplight, he could see dark circles under her eyes. "Old habits. I've always been an early riser." She gestured to the coffee pot. "I hope you don't mind. I made coffee." "Mind? I'm grateful." He poured himself a cup, noting that it was strong and hot and exactly what he needed. "You didn't have to start so early. You must still be exhausted." "I slept enough." It was clearly a lie, but her tone didn't invite argument. "I thought I might make breakfast, if you'll tell me what you have on hand." They worked together in the quiet kitchen, Nora discovering where things were kept, Caleb watching her move with that same careful efficiency she'd shown the night before. She found eggs and flour and the last of the bacon, and soon the smell of cooking filled the house. Lily came tumbling down the loft ladder, still in her nightgown, eyes bright. "It's Christmas! Papa, can we open presents after breakfast?" Caleb's stomach sank. He'd been so preoccupied with Nora's arrival that he'd completely forgotten about Christmas preparations. He had nothing wrapped, nothing special planned, just the usual small things he tried to do each year to make the day feel less empty. He began. "I have something for you, Lily," Nora said softly. She wiped her hands on a towel and disappeared into her room, returning with her carpet bag. From it, she drew a small cloth doll, simply made but carefully stitched, with yellow yarn hair and a smile embroidered in red thread. "I made her during the journey," Nora explained, holding the doll out to Lily. "I wasn't sure what you'd like, but every girl I've ever known loved dolls, so I thought perhaps—" Lily's face lit up like sunrise. She took the doll with reverent hands, cradling it to her chest. "She's beautiful. Does she have a name?" "That's for you to decide. She's yours now." "I'll call her Hope." Lily hugged the doll tight. "Because Papa says Christmas is about hope." Caleb felt something crack open in his chest. He watched his daughter clutch a doll made by a woman she'd met just yesterday, and saw more joy in her face than he'd managed to create in 2 years. "Thank you," he said to Nora, his voice rough. "You didn't have to. I wanted to." Nora turned back to the stove. "Now, let's have breakfast, shall we? The bacon's getting cold." They ate together, Lily talking nonstop about Hope the doll and all the adventures they would have. After breakfast, Nora insisted on cleaning up while Caleb went to tend the stock. When he returned an hour later, stamping snow from his boots, He found the house transformed. It wasn't anything dramatic, just small touches. The dishes arranged more neatly on the shelves, the chairs positioned to make better use of the light, a cloth that had been wadded in a corner now folded and placed on the table. But somehow the room felt warmer, more lived in. Nora was in her room with the door open, and he could see her unpacking her carpet bag. The contents laid out on the bed were pitiful. One other dress as worn as the one she wore, some undergarments, a hairbrush, a small Bible, and a bundle of letters tied with string. That was it. That was everything she owned in the world. Caleb turned away, unsettled. He busied himself with mending a harness that didn't really need mending, trying not to think about what kind of life led a person to such poverty, trying not to wonder if he'd made a terrible mistake. By afternoon, the snow had stopped and weak sunlight broke through the clouds. Lily begged to go outside and play, and Nora offered to supervise. Caleb watched from the window as they built a small snowman in the yard, Lily laughing and Nora smiling despite the cold that must have cut through her threadbare coat. That evening, he made good on his promise about a Christmas tree. They walked into the sparse woods behind the property and cut a small pine, dragging it back to set up in the corner of the main room. Nora produced a needle and thread from her seemingly endless bag and helped Lily string popcorn into garlands while Caleb whittled wooden stars to hang from the branches. It was the most normal Christmas Eve had felt in years. That night, after Lily was asleep, Caleb and Nora sat in the rocking chairs by the fire. The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable, but not hostile either. "Your daughter is wonderful," Nora said finally. "You've done well with her." "I've done poorly," Caleb replied honestly. "She needs things I can't give her. She needs love, and she has that in abundance." Nora's hands worked at something in her lap. He saw she was mending one of Lily's stockings, the stitches small and precise. "Everything else can be learned." "Can it?" He studied her profile in the firelight. "Can you teach yourself to replace someone irreplaceable?" Nora's hands stilled. "I wouldn't presume to replace your wife, Mr. Rourke. I'm only here to help, to make things easier. That's all I can offer." "Why?" The question came out before he could stop it. "Why would you travel 2,000 miles to help a stranger? What were you running from?" Her jaw tightened. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, "Does it matter?" "I brought you into my daughter's life. Yes, it matters." "I wasn't running from anything criminal, if that's your concern. No debts, no warrants, no angry husband waiting to drag me back." Her voice remained steady, but he heard steel underneath. "I was simply in a position where I needed to leave, and your advertisement offered a way to do so with dignity and tact. That's all you need to know." "Is it?" She met his eyes then, and he saw something fierce in her gaze. "Mr. Rourke, I came here to work. I came to be useful. I came to earn my place in a household, and perhaps, in time, to build something resembling a life. What I left behind is my own business. If you cannot accept that, then say so now, and I'll leave tomorrow. But I will not be interrogated about my past like a criminal." They stared at each other across the flickering firelight. Caleb knew he should back down, knew he was being unfair, but some stubborn part of him couldn't let it go. "Fine," he said finally. "Keep your secrets. But if they come back to hurt my daughter, we'll have a problem." "They won't." Nora returned to her sewing. "I promise you that." The conversation died after that. Soon Nora excused herself to bed, leaving Caleb alone with the dying fire and his troubled thoughts. He'd wanted help. He'd wanted someone to make Lily's life better. Instead, he'd gotten a mystery wrapped in threadbare wool, a woman with secrets in her eyes and scars he couldn't see. But Lily loved the doll. Lily had smiled today more than she had in months. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that had to be enough. Outside, the wind picked up again, howling across the frozen plains. Inside, the house settled into silence, three strangers bound by agreement and circumstance, learning the shapes of each other's shadows. Christmas had come, and with it, a woman named Nora Hale, carrying everything she owned in a carpet bag and nothing but determination in her heart. Whether that would be enough to survive a Wyoming winter, both the one outside and the one slowly forming inside Caleb Rourke's guarded heart, remained to be seen. The days after Christmas settled into a rhythm that surprised Caleb with its quiet efficiency. Each morning he woke to find Nora already up, the fire burning, coffee made. She moved through the house like a ghost, touching everything but demanding nothing. Within a week, the cabin had transformed in ways he couldn't quite articulate but felt in his bones. The shelves no longer held dishes in haphazard stacks, but were organized by size and use. The window glass gleamed where before it had been dulled by dust. The floors were swept twice daily. The smell of baking bread replaced the stale odor of bachelor cooking. Lily's clothes appeared mended and pressed. Hanging on pegs, Nora had installed herself using nails she'd found in the barn. But it was the small things that struck him most. The way Nora placed wildflowers in a jar on the table despite the winter cold, finding dried stems with interesting shapes. The way she'd taken apart Sarah's old sewing basket and reorganized it, making it functional again. The way she sat with Lily each evening after supper, teaching her letters by lamplight, her patient voice never rising in frustration when the girl struggled. "No, sweetheart, the B curves this way, see?" Nora guided Lily's small hand across the slate. "Like a belly sticking out. And D is like a door opening." "Why do they look so much the same?" Lily's tongue poked out in concentration. "Because letters like to confuse us. But we're smarter than they are, aren't we?" Lily giggled. "We're very smart." Caleb watched from his chair, pretending to read the week-old newspaper. He'd never been good at teaching. His patience ran too thin, his explanations too complex. But Nora had a gift for breaking things down, for making learning feel like play rather than work. "Mr. Rourke?" Nora looked up. "Do you have any books? Primers, perhaps?" Lily's ready to move beyond the alphabet. "There's a few in the trunk in my room. Sarah's. I'll dig them out." A shadow crossed Nora's face at the mention of Sarah, but she only nodded. "That would be helpful. Thank you." He found the books that night. 3 primers Sarah had brought from St. Louis, along with a Bible and a volume of poetry. He'd packed them away after she died, unable to look at her handwriting in the margins. Now he dusted them off and brought them to Nora, who received them with something like reverence. "These are wonderful," she breathed, turning pages carefully. "Lily will love them." Sarah was a teacher before we married. She always said education was the greatest gift you could give a child. She was right. Nora closed the book gently. "You must miss her terribly." Caleb's throat tightened. "Every day." "I'm sorry, I don't mean to intrude on your grief." "You're not." He paused, then asked the question that had been nagging at him. "Your husband. Do you miss him?" Nora's expression shuddered. "That's different." "How?" "It just is." She stood clutching the books. "Thank you for these. I'll take good care of them." She retreated to her room before he could press further, leaving him with more questions than answers. But over the following days, pieces of her story emerged in fragments, like ice breaking up in spring thaw. He learned she'd grown up in Connecticut, the daughter of a minister who died when she was 12. Her mother had remarried a merchant who resented the expense of raising another man's child. At 16, Nora had married to escape that house, choosing a clerk named Thomas Hale, who seemed kind. "He was kind," she told Lily one afternoon while they churned butter together. "At first, but kindness can fade when money gets tight and dreams don't come true." "What happened to him?" Lily asked. "He got sick. A fever in his lungs, lasted 3 weeks before—" Nora's hand stilled on the churn. "Before he passed. Like my mama." "Yes, sweetheart, like your mama." Caleb, listening from the doorway where he'd come in from the barn, heard something in Nora's voice that suggested the story wasn't quite that simple. But Lily seemed satisfied, and Nora changed the subject quickly, teaching the girl a butter-churning song that made her laugh. The house grew warmer with each passing day, not from the fire but from something harder to name. Life, maybe. The sound of female voices, the smell of proper cooking, the evidence that someone cared enough to make things nice. But Caleb noticed other things too. The way Nora ate sparingly, always giving Lily and him the larger portions. The way she wore the same 2 dresses in rotation, washing one while wearing the other, never complaining about the cold though he could see her shiver. The way she sometimes pressed a hand to her ribs when she thought no one was watching, as if something there hurt. One morning in early January he found her in the barn before dawn, mucking out stalls. "What are you doing?" He couldn't keep the irritation from his voice. "That's my work." "You have enough work." She didn't stop, just kept shoveling. I'm capable of helping. I didn't bring you here to break your back doing barn chores. No, you brought me here to cook and clean and watch your daughter. But there's only so much cooking and cleaning a house needs, and Lily's a good girl who doesn't require constant supervision, so I find other ways to be useful. Nora, please, Mr. Rourke. She finally stopped and faced him, her breath fogging in the cold air. Let me be useful. It's all I have to offer. Something in her eyes stopped his protest, a desperate kind of pride that he recognized because he'd felt it himself after Sarah died, the need to prove worth through work, to justify existence through exhaustion. Fine, he said, but you don't need to prove anything. We had an agreement. You're keeping your end. Am I? She leaned on the shovel. Your daughter needs more than I can give her. She needs someone who knows how to be a mother, not just someone who knows how to keep house. You're doing fine. I'm doing adequately. Nora's jaw set. There's a difference. Before he could argue, she returned to her work, and he left her to it, frustrated in ways he couldn't articulate. The truth was, she was right. Lily had grown more comfortable around Nora, less fearful, but there was still a wall between them. Lily called her Miss Nora with careful politeness, never just Nora, and certainly never anything approaching Mama. She accepted Nora's care but didn't seek her comfort the way a child should seek a mother. And Nora, for all her patience and gentleness, maintained a similar distance. She fulfilled her duties impeccably, but never overstepped, never presumed intimacy she hadn't been granted. It was like watching two people dance around each other, both wanting connection but neither quite brave enough to reach for it. The town made things worse. Caleb had to go to Salvation every 2 weeks for supplies, and he'd been taking Nora and Lily with him since New Year's. The first trip had been tolerable, curious stares but few comments. The second trip, people had started talking. That's her? He'd overheard Mrs. Patterson whisper to her daughter in the general store. My goodness, she's practically skeletal. What must his poor late wife think, him replacing her with something the cat dragged in? Caleb had gritted his teeth and said nothing, loading his supplies with mechanical precision. But Nora had heard. He'd seen her face go white, seen her hands tremble as she'd pretended to examine fabric she couldn't afford. It got worse from there. I heard she came from a workhouse, someone murmured behind them at the post office. I heard she was a fallen woman. You know the type. Poor little Lily, having to live with that creature. Someone should report it to the territorial marshal. Each trip became an ordeal. Nora held her head high, but Caleb could see the toll it took. She grew quieter, more withdrawn. She started finding excuses not to come to town, claiming work at home that needed doing. Let them talk, Caleb told her, after one particularly bad trip where Margaret Hendricks had actually crossed the street to avoid them. They're small-minded fools. They're your neighbors, Nora replied quietly. And they're right about one thing. I'm not what you deserved. What I deserved? Anger flared hot in his chest. What does that mean? It means you could have found someone better, someone the town would accept, someone who didn't arrive looking like a beggar. I didn't ask for someone better. I asked for help. And you're getting what you paid for, aren't you? Bitterness crept into her voice. Cheap goods, cheaply bought. Don't. Caleb stepped closer. Don't let them poison you with their gossip. It's not poison if it's true. Nora turned away. I should have been honest in my letters. I should have told you how bad things were, given you a choice. You think I wouldn't have sent for you anyway? I think you would have hesitated, looked for someone else, someone who wouldn't shame you in front of the whole town. I don't give a damn what this town thinks. You should. She met his eyes. Because Lily has to grow up here, and if they think her new mother is trash, they'll treat her accordingly. The word mother hung in the air between them. Nora had never called herself that before, never presumed the title, and now she'd said it only to diminish herself. Lily doesn't care what they think, Caleb said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. Not yet, but she will. Nora's shoulders sagged. Children always do, eventually. She'd retreated to her room after that conversation, and Caleb had spent the evening angry at everyone, at the town for their cruelty, at Nora for believing them, at himself for not knowing how to fix it. But the gossip continued to fester, growing more vicious with each passing week. Thomas Pruitt mentioned it while they were both at the feed store. Folks are saying you got swindled, Caleb, sent good money east and got nothing but skin and bones in return. Folks should mind their own business. I'm just saying, if you wanted to send her back, no one would blame you. There's still time to find someone more suitable. Caleb had gripped the bag of feed so hard his knuckles went white. Nora's not a mail-order catalog dress I can return for a refund. She's a person, and she's staying. But Thomas's words burrowed deep. Send her back. The idea had never occurred to him, but once planted, it took root. Not because he wanted to, God help him, he didn't, but because maybe it would be kinder. Maybe Nora would be happier somewhere else, somewhere people didn't look at her like she was something shameful. He watched her more carefully after that, looking for signs she wanted to leave. But what he saw instead confused him. He saw her wake before dawn every morning, lighting the fire with hands that shook from cold. He saw her portion out meals with mathematical precision, always making sure Lily got the most, then him, then taking whatever remained. He saw her spend hours teaching Lily to read, to write, to do simple arithmetic, never showing impatience even when his daughter struggled. He saw her mend clothes by candlelight after everyone else had gone to bed, stitching until her eyes watered. He saw her turn his house into a home through sheer force of will and endless labor. What he didn't see was unhappiness with him or with their arrangement. What he saw was someone trying desperately to be worth the roof over her head, and it broke something in him. One evening in late January, after Lily had gone to bed, he found Nora at the kitchen table darning his socks. The pile beside her was enormous. She'd apparently decided to repair every pair he owned. "You don't have to do that," he said. "They needed doing." "Nora." He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "We need to talk." Her hands stilled. "If you're going to send me away, please just say it quickly." "What? No." He was stunned. "Why would you think that?" "Because it's what everyone expects, what everyone wants." She set down the needle. "And perhaps what would be best?" "For who?" "For you, for Lily." She swallowed. "I've brought you nothing but shame." "That's not true." "Isn't it? The town thinks you're a fool for taking me in. They pity Lily for having to live with someone like me. Margaret Hendricks told me to my face last week that I should have the decency to leave before I corrupted your daughter further." Rage flooded through him. Margaret Hendricks is a vicious old... She's right, though. Nora's voice was flat. "I'm not mother material. I'm not even wife material. I'm just someone who knows how to scrub floors and cook meals, and you could hire a housekeeper for that without the scandal." "Stop it." Caleb reached across the table and caught her hand. "Just stop." She stared at their joined hands like she'd never seen such a thing. "I don't care what Margaret Hendricks thinks," he continued. "I don't care what the whole damn town thinks. You came here on Christmas Eve looking half dead, and in a month you've brought life back to this house. You've made Lily smile. You've given her stability and attention and patience I couldn't manage on my best day. So no, I'm not sending you away. The only way you're leaving this house is if you choose to go." Nora's eyes had gone bright with unshed tears. "Why?" "Because we made an agreement, because you've kept your end, and because..." He stopped, surprised by what he'd almost said. "Because what?" "Because you're the first person since Sarah died who makes this house feel less empty. Because watching you with Lily soothes something raw in my chest. Because your presence here matters in ways I don't understand and can't explain." But he couldn't say any of that. It felt like betrayal, of Sarah's memory, of his own grief, of the careful distance he'd maintained. "Because it's the right thing to do," he finished lamely. Nora studied him for a long moment, then slowly pulled her hand free. "Thank you, Mr. Rourke. I'll try to be worthy of your confidence." "You already are." She didn't look convinced, but she returned to her darning with something that might have been relief softening her shoulders. Caleb retreated to his own room, his mind churning. He'd meant what he said. She wasn't going anywhere. But he couldn't deny the truth that had emerged during their conversation. The town's poison was working. Not on him, but on Nora. She was withdrawing further each day, pulling back from Lily, from him, from any claim to belonging. Soon there would be nothing left but a hollow woman going through motions, and what good would that do anyone? He had to find a way to stop it, to make her believe she had value beyond her labor, to give her a reason to stay that went beyond contractual obligation. But how? The answer came from an unexpected source 3 days later. Lily fell ill. It started with a cough and low fever, nothing alarming at first. But by evening she was burning up, her small body shaking with chills. Caleb paced the main room while Nora tended her in the loft, pressing cool cloths to her forehead, coaxing sips of water past cracked lips. "Should I ride for the doctor?" Caleb called up. "Not yet." Nora's voice was steady. "It's likely just a cold. We'll watch her tonight." But as the hours crawled past, Lily worsened. Her fever spiked higher. She began to hallucinate, crying for her mother, begging Sarah not to leave. "Mama, please," she sobbed, thrashing weakly. "Don't go! Don't leave me alone!" Caleb stood at the base of the ladder, frozen. He could hear Nora murmuring softly, but couldn't make out the words. Then Lily's crying shifted, became more desperate. "I'm scared, Mama, I'm scared." "I know, sweetheart, I know." Nora's voice carried down clearly now, thick with emotion. "But I'm right here. I won't leave you. I promise." "You're not my mama." "No, I'm not." A pause. "But I'm here anyway. And I'm not going anywhere." "Promise?" "I promise. Even if you get better and don't need me anymore. Even if your papa decides he doesn't want me here. I'll still find a way to make sure you're safe." Something in her voice made Caleb's chest ache. It wasn't the careful tone of an employee fulfilling duties. It was raw, unguarded, the sound of someone who'd already given her heart away and was terrified of the consequences. Lily's crying gradually subsided, replaced by ragged breathing. Caleb heard Nora singing then, very softly. A lullaby he didn't recognize, words in another language that might have been Welsh. He listened until his legs gave out, and he had to sit on the floor, his back against the wall. Above him, Nora sang and Lily slept, and the night stretched on forever. When dawn finally broke, he climbed the ladder to find both of them asleep. Lily's fever had broken, leaving her damp and peaceful. Nora was curled beside her on the narrow bed, one protective arm around the girl, her face gaunt with exhaustion. Caleb stood there watching them, these two broken souls who'd somehow found each other, and he realized with sudden, painful clarity that Nora wasn't just keeping house or fulfilling an agreement. She loved his daughter, fiercely, desperately, with all the intensity of someone who'd had little to love and was making up for lost time. The question was whether he could let her. Over the next few days, as Lily recovered, Caleb observed their growing bond with mixed emotions. Lily reached for Nora first now when she felt sick, curled into her lap when she wanted comfort, asked her opinion before his. And Nora, who'd been so careful to maintain distance, melted under that trust like snow in spring. But the town's gossip only intensified. "I heard the child's getting too attached," he overheard at church the following Sunday. "Someone should warn Caleb before it's too late. That woman's not fit to raise a decent girl." He'd turned to confront the speaker, Chester Waits, of all people, but Nora's hand on his arm stopped him. "Don't," she whispered. "It only makes it worse." "They have no right. They have every right to their opinions. And causing a scene in church won't change their minds." She was right, damn her. So he swallowed his anger and sat through the service while judgment radiated from every pew. On the ride home, Lily chattered obliviously in the back of the wagon, but Nora sat rigid beside him, staring at nothing. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "For what?" "For subjecting you to that. You didn't subject me to anything. I chose to come." "Did you?" He kept his eyes on the road. "Or were you so desperate you'd have agreed to anything?" She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "Both can be true." That evening, after Lily was asleep, Nora came to him with a request that surprised him. "Mr. Rourke, I need to ask a favor." "All right." "I'd like permission to write some letters to people I knew back east, and I'll need money for postage." His stomach tightened. "You planning to leave?" "No, but I have debts, small ones, but they weigh on me. I promised people I'd repay them when I could, and I'd like to start doing so." "You don't have any money." "I know. That's why I'm asking if there are extra chores I could do, work that would earn a wage beyond room and board. I don't expect charity, but if there's anything you need done that you'd normally pay someone for. Nora, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Her eyes flashed with rare fire. I won't be a kept woman, Mr. Rourke. I won't live my whole life in debt, beholden to your charity. If I'm to stay here, I need to do so with my dignity intact. He recognized that pride again, that fierce need for independence, and he understood it, even though it frustrated him. Fine, he said. There's a lot that needs doing come spring. Garden planting, fence mending, chickens to tend. You help with that, and I'll pay you a wage. Fair? More than fair, thank you. She started to turn away, but he stopped her. Nora, those debts. How much do you owe? $37. Massoons. It might as well be $1,000. $37. It was nothing to him. He had that much in the strong box in his room, but to her it represented an insurmountable burden, a weight that kept her trapped. I could— No! She cut him off. I appreciate the thought, truly, but I need to do this myself. Can you understand that? He could. God help him, he could. So he nodded and watched her retreat to her room, this woman who'd arrived in rags but refused to be broken by poverty or shame. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, Caleb wondered if maybe, just maybe, he'd gotten far more than he'd bargained for. Not in a bad way. In a way that terrified him because it meant reevaluating everything he thought he knew about what he wanted and what he needed. The town could think what it liked. Margaret Hendricks could spread her poison. Thomas Pruitt could offer his pity. But they didn't see what he saw. They didn't see Nora wake before dawn each morning to make sure his daughter had a warm house to wake to. They didn't see her sing lullabies in languages she'd never explained. They didn't see her mend clothes until her fingers bled, or teach reading with endless patience, or bring small dignities to a house that had forgotten them. They saw rags and poverty and something to mock. He was beginning to see worth. Whether that realization would change anything remained to be seen. But as January gave way to February and winter deepened its hold on the Wyoming plains, something in Caleb Rourke's frozen heart began, very slowly, very carefully, to thaw. February brought bitter cold that settled into the bones and refused to leave. The wind howled across the plains with a fury that made the cabin walls groan, and ice formed thick on the inside of the windows despite the fire that burned day and night. It was the kind of cold that made every task twice as hard, every movement an exercise in endurance. Caleb spent those frozen weeks working himself to exhaustion. The cattle needed constant attention, breaking through ice for water, hauling feed through snowdrifts that came up to his knees. His hands cracked and bled from the cold. His body ached in ways he'd forgotten were possible. But he welcomed the pain because it meant he didn't have to think. Didn't have to think about the way Nora's laughter sounded when Lily told a silly joke. Didn't have to think about how the house felt warmer when she was in it. Didn't have to think about the fact that somewhere along the way, his mail order arrangement had become something more complicated. One evening in mid-February, he came in from the barn to find the cabin filled with the smell of baking. Nora stood at the stove, flour dusting her worn dress, cheeks flushed from the heat. Lily sat at the table, carefully rolling out dough, her tongue poking out in concentration. "We're making hand pies," Lily announced proudly. "Miss Nora's teaching me." "I can see that." Caleb hung his coat and moved closer to the stove, letting the warmth seep into his frozen limbs. "Smells good." "There's stew staying warm," Nora said without looking at him. "And coffee if you want it." "Thanks." He poured himself a cup and stood watching them work. Nora's hands moved with practiced efficiency, crimping edges and brushing egg wash with the ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Lily mimicked her movements, slower but earnest. "Like this?" Lily held up a misshapen pie. "Perfect," Nora said warmly. "You're a natural." The girl beamed, and Caleb felt something twist in his chest. This should have been Sarah teaching Lily to bake. This should have been his wife standing at the stove, his wife laughing at their daughter's enthusiasm. Instead, it was a stranger, a woman he'd known for barely 2 months, filling a space that should have remained sacred. He turned away, the coffee suddenly bitter on his tongue. "Mr. Rourke?" Nora's voice was quiet. "Are you all right?" "Fine." He set down the cup too hard. I need to check the stock one more time. He grabbed his coat and fled back into the cold before either of them could respond. Outside, the wind bit through his clothes and the sky stretched black and endless overhead, stars scattered like ice chips across velvet. He stood there breathing hard, watching his breath fog in the freezing air. What was wrong with him? He'd brought Nora here specifically to do the things Sarah had done, to cook and clean and care for Lily. That was the arrangement. That was what he'd wanted. But seeing it happen, seeing Lily bond with her, seeing his daughter's face light up the way it used to light up for Sarah, felt like betrayal. Like he was letting his wife be erased, replaced by someone who couldn't possibly measure up. Yet even as he thought it, he knew it wasn't fair. Nora wasn't trying to replace Sarah. She was just trying to survive, to earn her place, to make herself useful. The growing attachment between her and Lily wasn't manipulation. It was just two lonely souls finding comfort in each other. So why did it make him so angry? He didn't go back inside for an hour. When he finally did, the pies were cooling on the table and Lily was already in her nightgown, ready for bed. Nora was cleaning up, her movements slow with exhaustion. "Papa?" Lily ran to him. "We saved you a pie, the best one." "That's real nice, sweetheart." He forced a smile. "You go on up to bed now. I'll come tuck you in." After she'd climbed the ladder, Caleb stood in awkward silence while Nora finished wiping down the table. Finally, she spoke, her voice careful. "I apologize if I overstepped. With the baking, I should have asked first." "You didn't overstep. You seemed upset." "I'm not upset with you." He ran a hand through his hair. "It's just complicated. Because I'm not her." It wasn't a question. "Because you're here and she's not." The words came out harsher than he'd intended. "Because every time I see you doing the things she used to do, it reminds me that she's gone. And I know that's not your fault. I know that's exactly what I hired you for, but it still hurts." Nora set down the cloth. "I understand." "Do you?" "More than you might think." She met his eyes. "I told you my husband died. What I didn't say was that I was relieved when he did. Does that shock you?" It did, but he shook his head. "Thomas wasn't a good man, Mr. Rourke, not after the first year. He drank. He gambled. When those didn't work, he took his frustrations out on me." She said it flatly, without emotion. "When the fever took him, my first thought wasn't grief. It was freedom. And then came the guilt, because what kind of wife feels that way? What kind of person celebrates a death?" Caleb's hands curled into fists. "He hit you. Among other things. But that's not the point." She wrapped her arms around herself. "The point is, I know what it's like to have complicated feelings about a dead spouse. To be angry at them for leaving, even when you know it wasn't their choice. To feel guilty for moving on, even when moving on is the only way to survive. Sarah wasn't, he couldn't find the words. "I know. Your wife was good and kind and you loved her truly. That's obvious in everything you do." Nora's voice softened. "But love doesn't make grief any simpler, and I imagine it makes it harder to watch someone else fill the space she left behind." "You're not filling her space. You couldn't." "I know." She didn't sound offended. "But I'm occupying a role she held, and that must be difficult. I just want you to know that I'm not trying to be her. I'm only trying to be useful." "You are useful. More than useful." He struggled to articulate what he meant. "Lily's different since you came. Happier, less afraid. And the house, it feels like a home again instead of just a place to sleep. But watching it happen makes me feel like I'm betraying Sarah's memory. Like I'm saying she was replaceable. And she wasn't. She isn't. No one's asking you to replace her." Nora moved closer, her expression earnest. "Keep her memory. Tell Lily stories about her. Make sure she knows her mother. That's not betrayal. That's honoring who Sarah was." "And what about you?" "What about me? Doesn't it bother you, being second choice, being the woman who came after?" Nora laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mr. Rourke, I've been second choice my entire life. Second to my stepfather's real children. Second to Thomas's drinking. Second to every pretty girl who walked past. Being second to a woman you actually loved and respected, That's the kindest second place I've ever held." The words hit him like a blow. He stared at this woman who'd been beaten down by life until she expected nothing, asked for nothing, hoped for nothing beyond basic survival. And he felt ashamed. "You deserve better than that," he said roughly. "Perhaps, but I'm a realist." She turned back to her cleaning. "Now you should go tuck in Lily before she falls asleep waiting." He climbed the ladder to find his daughter still awake, Hope the doll clutched in her arms. "Papa?" she whispered. "Are you mad at Miss Nora?" "No, sweetheart. Why would you think that? You left when we were making pies, like you were angry." Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, brushing hair from her forehead. "I wasn't angry, just remembering your mama. Sometimes that makes me sad. I miss Mama too." Lily's eyes welled up. "But I like Miss Nora. Is that bad?" "No, baby, that's not bad at all. She's nice to me, and she doesn't get mad when I make mistakes, and she sings pretty songs." Lily's small hand gripped his. "Can she stay forever?" The question lodged in his throat. "Would you want that?" "Yes, because then maybe she could be my new mama, not instead of my real mama, but like an extra mama. Is that allowed?" Out of the mouths of children, Lily had cut straight to the heart of what he'd been wrestling with for weeks and found a solution his adult mind had refused to consider. Not replacement, addition. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said honestly. "We'd have to ask Miss Nora how she feels about that. She loves me. I can tell." Lily said it with the absolute certainty of a child. "And I love her, so it should be okay, right?" "It should be." He kissed her forehead. "Now sleep. We'll figure it all out tomorrow." But lying in his own bed an hour later, Caleb knew tomorrow wouldn't bring answers. The problem wasn't Nora's feelings for Lily. Those were obvious to anyone with eyes. The problem was him. His guilt, his grief, his stubborn refusal to let go of the past enough to accept whatever the present was trying to become. The next morning brought a crisis that pushed his internal struggles aside. One of his best breeding cows had gotten into the grain shed overnight and foundered. By the time he found her, she was down and suffering, her stomach bloated with gas that could kill her if not relieved. He worked for hours in the freezing barn, getting her up, walking her despite her resistance, massaging her distended belly. Nora appeared at some point with hot coffee and food, but he waved her away. This was his responsibility, his failure for not securing the shed properly. By afternoon, the cow was improving, but not out of danger. He couldn't leave her, which meant he couldn't go to town for the supplies he'd planned to get, including the fabric Nora had requested to make Lily a new dress. "I'll go," Nora said when he told her. "Absolutely not." "Why not? I can drive a wagon. I have a list of what you need. And frankly, Mr. Rourke, you look like you're about to collapse. You need to stay here and rest while I'm gone. The town? We'll talk regardless of what I do." Her jaw set. "I'm not afraid of their gossip." But he was afraid for her, afraid of what Margaret Hendricks and her ilk might say or do if Nora showed up alone, without him there to deflect the worst of it. Still, the cow needed watching, and the supplies were necessary. "Take Lily," he said finally. "Don't go alone." So they went, Nora driving the wagon with Lily beside her, wrapped in blankets against the cold. Caleb watched them disappear down the road and felt unease settle deep in his gut. They returned 3 hours later. He knew immediately something was wrong by the way Nora held herself too rigid, too controlled. Lily's face was tear-streaked. "What happened?" He strode to the wagon. "Nothing that can't be endured." Nora began unloading supplies with mechanical precision. "We got everything on the list." "Nora?" "Papa, Mrs. Hendricks was mean," Lily burst out. "She said Miss Nora was trash and we should be ashamed to be seen with her. And then Mr. Pruitt said you must be desperate to keep her. And Miss Nora didn't say anything. She just stood there, but I could tell she was sad." Red rage flooded Caleb's vision. "They said that in front of Lily?" "It doesn't matter." Nora carried a sack of flour toward the house. "The hell it doesn't." He caught her arm. "What else did they say?" "Mr. Rourke, please, it's done. Let it go. Tell me." She finally met his eyes, and what he saw there made his stomach turn. Not tears. Nora never seemed to cry. But something worse. resignation, acceptance that this was all she deserved. They suggested I was taking advantage of your grief, she said quietly, that I'd probably lied about my past to trap you into marriage, that any decent woman would have refused to come here under false pretenses. Margaret offered to help you find a proper bride, someone with moral fiber and good breeding. She said it quite loudly, in the middle of the general store so everyone could hear. And you said? Nothing. What could I say? She's not entirely wrong. She's completely wrong. His hand tightened on her arm. You didn't trap me. You didn't lie. You came here because I asked you to come. I came here because I was desperate and you were willing. She pulled free. There's a difference between being wanted and being tolerated, Mr. Rourke. I understand which one I am. She walked away before he could respond, leaving him standing in the cold with his daughter watching him with enormous eyes. Papa, are we going to make Miss Nora leave? No. The word came out fierce. No, we're not. But that night, lying awake listening to the wind howl, Caleb had to admit the truth. The town's poison was working exactly as intended. Not on him, he'd already decided Nora was staying, but on Nora herself. She was withdrawing again, pulling back into that shell of careful politeness that kept everyone at arm's length. And unless he found a way to convince her she had value beyond her utility, unless he could make her believe she deserved to be here, the town would eventually win. She'd leave not because he sent her away, but because she'd convinced herself she didn't deserve to stay. The answer came to him 3 days later while he was in the barn, mucking out stalls and thinking about everything and nothing. His shovel struck something in the hay, a wooden crate he'd stored there and forgotten about. When he pried it open, he found Sarah's things, the items he'd packed away after she died because looking at them hurt too much. There were dresses, carefully folded, a hairbrush with strands of blonde hair still caught in the bristles, books she'd loved, her sewing kit with the ivory thimble her mother had given her, and at the bottom, wrapped in cloth, her jewelry box. He opened it with shaking hands. Inside were the few pieces she'd owned, a cameo brooch, some hair combs, a string of pearls her grandmother had left her, and her wedding ring, which he'd removed from her finger after she died and couldn't bear to look at again. He held it now, studying how the lamplight caught in the small diamond. It was a modest ring, all he'd been able to afford when they married, but Sarah had loved it. She'd never taken it off until the fever made her hands swell too much to wear it. What would Sarah want? The question rose unbidden. If she could see him now, see the house full of life again, see Lily laughing, see Nora working herself to exhaustion to make them comfortable, what would Sarah say? He thought he knew. Sarah had been practical above all else. She'd have told him to stop wallowing in the past. She'd have told him Lily needed a mother more than he needed to preserve a shrine to grief. She'd have told him that honoring her memory didn't mean refusing to live. And she'd have told him that Nora, broken, proud, desperate Nora, deserved better than to be treated like an inconvenient servant. But knowing what Sarah would say and acting on it were different things. It meant letting go. It meant admitting the arrangement had evolved beyond business into something more complex. It meant risking his heart, which he'd sworn would always belong to Sarah alone. He sat in the hay for a long time, the ring warming in his palm, while horses shifted in their stalls and wind rattled the barn walls. Finally, he made a decision. Not about love. God knew he wasn't ready for that conversation, might never be ready, but about worth, about declaring to the town and to Nora herself that she had value, that she belonged, that she was chosen. That night after supper, he retreated to his workbench in the corner of the barn. By lamplight, he selected a piece of good pine and began to carve. His hands remembered the motions from long ago. His father had been a woodworker, and Caleb had learned young. He hadn't carved anything in years, but the skills came back slowly. He worked for hours, the knife moving carefully, shaping petals and stem and leaves. He'd never been artistic like his father, but he poured everything he couldn't say into the wood. Every cut was a declaration. Every curl of shaving that fell away was a piece of his grief releasing its grip. By the time he finished, dawn was breaking. He held up the carving, a simple flower, not perfect but honest. A tangible thing that said what his words couldn't. You matter. You're seen. You're valued. He brought it inside and set it on the kitchen table, then collapsed into bed for a few hours of sleep. When he woke, the house was quiet. He found Nora sitting at the table, the wooden flower clutched in both hands, tears streaming silently, down her face. Nora, she looked up and the raw emotion in her eyes nearly undid him. You made this. For me. Yes, he crossed to the table. I wanted you to have something that was yours. But why? Her voice broke. Why would you do this? Because the town's wrong about you. Because you deserve to know that someone sees your worth. Because... He stopped, struggling with words that felt too big. Because you matter. To Lily. To this house. To me. She stared at him, the flower trembling in her grip. Mr. Rourke, I can't. You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. He pulled something from his pocket, Sarah's ring, which he'd cleaned until it shone. And I wanted to give you this. Her eyes went wide. I can't take that. That was your wife's. I know. And I think she'd want you to have it. He set the ring on the table beside the flower. Not as a wedding ring, that's not what I'm offering, but as a symbol, a promise that you have a place here, a real place. Not as hired help, but as family. Family. She said the word like it was foreign. Lily asked me if you could be her extra mama. Not instead of Sarah, but in addition to. And I told her we'd have to ask you. He met her eyes. So I'm asking, will you be that for her? Will you stop holding yourself at a distance and let yourself be the mother she needs? And what about you? The question came out barely above a whisper. What do you need, Mr. Rourke? The honest answer terrified him. He needed to stop feeling guilty for being alive. He needed to stop comparing every moment to the past. He needed to let go of Sarah's ghost enough to see what was standing right in front of him. But he couldn't say that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I need Lily to be happy, he said instead. And you make her happy. That's enough. It wasn't enough, and they both knew it. But Nora nodded slowly, picking up the ring with shaking fingers. All right, she said. I'll try. I can't promise to be what Sarah was. I don't want you to be Sarah. I want you to be yourself. That's who Lily loves. That's who... He stopped before he said something he couldn't take back. That's who belongs here. Nora slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if Sarah herself had approved. Then she stood and did something that shocked him. She stepped close and wrapped her arms around him in a brief, fierce hug. Thank you, she whispered against his chest, for seeing me, for choosing me. I'll try to be worthy of it. Before he could respond, she pulled away and hurried to her room, the flower and ring clutched close. Caleb stood frozen, the feel of her embrace still burning through his shirt. What had he just done? He'd meant to give her confidence, to combat the town's cruelty. Instead, he'd opened a door he wasn't sure he was ready to walk through, because somewhere in the giving of gifts and the speaking of truth, something had shifted. The careful distance he'd maintained had cracked wide open, and standing in the warm kitchen with the smell of coffee and baking bread, Caleb realized with dawning terror that Nora Hale had become more than just the woman who kept his house. She'd become necessary. The change in Nora was subtle at first, like the first pale green shoots pushing through frozen ground in early spring. She still rose before dawn, still worked with the same quiet efficiency, but something in her posture had shifted. She held her head higher. She met his eyes more readily. And with Lily, the careful reserve crumbled entirely. Caleb watched it happen over the following days with a mixture of relief and trepidation. He'd see them in the kitchen, Nora's hand resting naturally on Lily's shoulder as she helped with a chore. He'd hear laughter from the loft where Nora now sat with Lily each night, reading stories and answering endless questions. He'd catch moments when Lily reached for Nora's hand without thinking, and Nora would squeeze back with such tenderness it made his chest ache. The wooden flower had taken up residence on the small shelf beside Nora's bed, where she could see it first thing each morning. And Sarah's ring, he couldn't stop noticing it catching the light as Nora worked, a band of gold and promise on her thin finger. One morning, nearly a week after he'd given her the gifts, Caleb came in from the barn to find Lily setting the table while Nora made breakfast. Nothing unusual in that. It had become their routine. But as he hung his coat, he heard his daughter's voice, casual and natural. Mama Nora, can I have jam on my biscuit? The word froze everyone in place. Lily looked up, suddenly uncertain, as if she'd only just realized what she'd said. Nora stood motionless at the stove, her back to them, one hand pressed flat against the counter. Caleb's heart hammered. This was the moment. He could correct Lily, remind her that Nora wasn't really her mother, maintain the boundary that kept everything safely defined. Or he could let it stand. "Lily?" Nora said softly, still not turning around. "You don't have to call me that. But I want to." Lily's voice was small. "You said I could have an extra mama. Papa said we asked you and you said yes. So, can I?" Nora finally turned and Caleb saw tears streaming down her face. But she was smiling, truly smiling, in a way he'd never seen before. "Yes, sweetheart. You can call me whatever feels right to you." "Mama Nora?" Lily tested it again, her face lighting up. "Mama Nora? Mama Nora? Mama Nora?" She sang it like a song, dancing in place. Nora crossed to her and knelt, pulling the girl into her arms. "I love you, Lily. So very much." "I love you too, Mama." Caleb had to turn away, his own eyes burning. This was what he'd wanted. Lily happy, Lily healing. But watching it happen felt like standing at a crossroads without a map, unsure which direction would lead home. "Mr. Rourke?" Nora's voice was tentative. Are you all right with this?" He forced himself to turn back, to meet her uncertain gaze. "It's what Lily needs, what she wants. So yes." Relief flooded her features, but he saw the question lurking behind it. "What about what you want?" But she didn't ask, and he was grateful. He didn't have an answer yet. The next Sunday, they went to church as usual. But this time, when the whispers started, Nora didn't shrink. She walked beside Caleb with her head high, Sarah's ring visible on her finger, Lily's hand clasped firmly in hers. And when Margaret Hendricks made a pointed comment about desperation making men foolish, Caleb heard himself respond before he could think better of it. "Mrs. Hendricks, I wonder if you could share your expertise on raising happy, well-adjusted children, since yours turned out so well." The entire congregation knew Margaret's son was a drunk, and her daughter had run off to San Francisco and never written home. "Oh wait, perhaps Nora's the one we should be asking. Look at Lily." His daughter stood beside Nora, bright-eyed and confident, no trace of the fearful child she'd been 3 months ago. The contrast with Margaret's bitter countenance couldn't have been starker. Margaret's face went purple. "Well, I never—" "No, you never did," Caleb agreed pleasantly. "That's the problem. Come on, Lily. Nora, let's find our seats." They sat in the third pew, and Caleb felt the weight of every eye in the church. But when he glanced at Nora, she was looking straight ahead, a tiny smile playing at her lips, and Lily was practically vibrating with pride. After the service, Thomas Pruitt approached them outside. Caleb tensed, expecting more of the same, but Thomas surprised him. "Caleb, I owe you an apology. And Mrs. Hale." He nodded to Nora. "I was wrong to judge without knowing. My Emma pointed out that it's none of my business how you run your household, and she's right. Your girl looks happy. That's what matters." Caleb blinked. "Thank you, Thomas." For what it's worth, Emma would like to call on Mrs. Hale sometime, if that would be acceptable. He looked uncomfortable, as if kindness didn't sit easy on him. "She says it's time this town remembered some Christian charity." "I'd like that very much," Nora said quietly. "Thank you." As they drove home, Lily chattered about the service while Caleb processed what had just happened. One small victory against the tide of gossip. One family willing to look past appearances to see truth. It wasn't much, but it was something. "You didn't have to defend me," Nora said later, when Lily had gone out to check on the chickens. "Yes, I did. It'll only make things worse with Margaret." "Let it. She's been a thorn in this town's side for 20 years. About time someone called her on it." He poured himself coffee. "Besides, what I said was true. Look at Lily. She's a different child than she was at Christmas. Children are resilient. They heal. Not without help. Not without someone who cares enough to put in the work." He met her eyes. "You did that. You're doing that. The town can think what it likes, but I know what I see." Color rose in her cheeks. "I'm just doing what you hired me to do." "No. You're doing considerably more than that." He set down his cup. "Nora, I need to apologize for how I've been. Distant, conflicted. making you feel like you had to constantly prove your worth. You lost your wife, you're allowed to grieve. Grief isn't an excuse for making you feel unwelcome in your own home, because this is your home now. I need you to believe that. She twisted Sarah's ring on her finger, a habit he'd noticed when she was nervous. I'm trying to, it's just, I've never really had a home before, not one that felt permanent. So believing this is mine, that I'm allowed to stay, it's harder than you might think. Even with a 6-year-old calling you mama, especially then, her voice dropped, because it means I have something to lose. And in my experience, the moment you start to care about something, that's when it gets taken away. The pain in her words cut deep. What kind of life had she lived? That stability felt like a prelude to loss. I can't promise nothing will ever go wrong, he said carefully. Life doesn't work that way. But I can promise you're not going to lose your place here through my doing. You're family now, Nora. That means something. Does it? She looked at him with those storm-colored eyes. Because family means different things to different people. To some it means loyalty and love. To others it means obligation and resentment. Which one are we? It was the most direct question she'd ever asked him, and he knew his answer mattered, knew she was asking something deeper than the surface words implied. I don't resent you, he said slowly. If anything, I resent myself. For needing help. For not being enough on my own. For... He stopped, the truth lodging in his throat. For what? For starting to forget what Sarah's voice sounded like. The confession came out raw. Some mornings I wake up and for a moment I hear someone moving in the kitchen and I think it's her. Then I remember and it's like losing her all over again. Except now there's guilt mixed in because part of me is relieved it's you. Relieved I don't have to do everything alone anymore. And that feels like betrayal. Nora was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. My mother died when I was 12. Within 6 months, my father remarried. I hated my stepmother for years, convinced she was trying to erase my mother. It took me a long time to understand that my father remarrying wasn't about replacing my mother. It was about surviving his grief, about choosing to keep living instead of dying alongside her. She paused. You're allowed to keep living, Mr. Rourke. Sarah would want that for you. How do you know what Sarah would want? Because I've read her letters, the ones she wrote to Lily before she died. At his shocked expression, she added quickly, Lily showed them to me. She wanted to share her mother with me. And in those letters, Sarah talked about how much she loved you both, how she wanted you to be happy, how she hoped, if the worst happened, you'd find a way to build a life worth living. Caleb's hands clenched. She wrote letters? 5 of them, 1 for each birthday until Lily turns 10. She wanted Lily to know her, to have something of her as she grew up. Nora's expression was soft. She never mentioned finding someone new for you, but she did say she hoped you wouldn't let grief make you forget how to live. That's not the same as permission to replace her, but it's not a demand that you stay frozen in the past either. He'd had no idea those letters existed. Sarah must have written them in the final days when the fever had her and they both knew she wouldn't recover. The thought of her weak and dying taking time to write to a daughter who wouldn't understand for years, it broke something open in his chest. I need to see them. Of course. They're Lily's and yours. I only read them because she asked me to. Nora stood. I'll get them. She returned with a ribbon-tied bundle, 5 envelopes in Sarah's careful script. Caleb took them with shaking hands, but didn't open them. Not yet. Not when he was already feeling too much. Thank you, he managed. Mr. Rourke, Caleb. It was the first time she'd used his given name. You don't have to choose between honoring Sarah and accepting me. There's room for both. I'm not asking to take her place. I'm just asking for my own place, however small it needs to be. But that was the problem, wasn't it? Her place wasn't small anymore. It had grown to fill corners of his life he hadn't realized were empty, and the thought of losing it, of losing her, had started to scare him almost as much as his grief for Sarah. Your place isn't small, he said roughly. That's what's terrifying. Before she could respond, Lily burst through the door, cheeks red from cold, clutching an egg. Look, the brown hen finally laid. The moment shattered, replaced by Lily's excitement and the practical business of daily life. but Caleb felt Nora's gaze on him for the rest of the evening, thoughtful and searching. That night, alone in his room, he finally opened Sarah's letters. The first was for Lily's 5th birthday, just after Sarah had died. The handwriting was shaky, but legible. My dearest Lily, you are 5 years old today, and I am not there to celebrate with you. This breaks my heart more than you can know, but I want you to understand something important. Death is not the end of love. I will love you forever, even from beyond. And I need you to know that it's all right to be happy, even though I'm gone. It's all right to laugh and play and grow. Your papa will take care of you. He's a good man, the best man. And if he finds someone to help him, someone to help you, that's all right too. Don't feel guilty for loving them. Love is not a finite resource. You can love me and love them both. Your heart is big enough for all of us. Caleb read it 3 times, tears blurring the words. Sarah had known. Even dying, she'd known he'd struggle with this exact thing, and she'd tried to give them both permission to move forward. The second letter was similar, full of love and encouragement. The third contained advice about growing up, about being brave and kind. The fourth talked about faith and doubt and finding your own path. But it was the 5th letter, meant for Lily's 10th birthday, that undid him completely. You're 10 now, old enough to understand some harder truths. I married your papa when we were both very young, barely more than children ourselves. We grew up together, learned together, built a life together. And I loved him with everything I had. But Lily, love isn't always enough. Sometimes sickness comes. Sometimes accidents happen. Sometimes people die too young, leaving holes that feel impossible to fill. When that happens, the people left behind have a choice. They can let the hole consume them, or they can find ways to keep living around it. I hope your papa chooses life. I hope he finds someone who makes the house feel warm again, who helps you grow into the wonderful person I know you'll become. And when he does, I hope you'll be kind to her. Because loving your papa and caring for you won't be easy. It will take someone special, someone brave and patient and strong. If he's found that person, if you're reading this and there's a woman in your life who's trying to be there for you, please give her a chance. Love her if you can. Not instead of me, but alongside the memory of me. Because the greatest gift you can give someone is to let them love you. Don't wall yourself off out of loyalty to me. I'm beyond walls now, but you and your papa still need to live. Caleb sat on the edge of his bed, the letter trembling in his hands, and finally let himself cry. Great shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep and primal, releasing 2 years of locked-away grief. Sarah was gone, truly gone. And she'd given him permission? No, she'd practically begged him to let someone else in. Someone like Nora. Nora, who'd arrived in rags and stayed through scorn, who'd loved his daughter without reservation, who'd asked for nothing but the chance to be useful and had given everything in return, who wore Sarah's ring not as a replacement but as a promise to honor what came before while building something new. When the tears finally subsided, Caleb felt scraped raw but somehow lighter, as if admitting the grief had lanced a wound that had been festering for months. He carefully returned the letters to their ribbon and set them aside. Tomorrow he'd share them with Lily, let her know her mother's words were meant for both of them. Tonight, he had something else to do. He found Nora in the kitchen, mending by lamplight as usual. She looked up when he entered, and whatever she saw in his face made her set down her sewing. "Are you all right?" I read the letters. "Oh." Understanding flooded her features. "Caleb, she gave us permission, both of us, to move forward, to build something new." He crossed to the table. "I've been holding on to grief so tight I couldn't see what was right in front of me. But I see it now." "See what?" "You. Not as a replacement or a substitute or hired help, just you." He pulled out a chair and sat. "You came here expecting nothing and gave everything. You made my daughter smile again. You made this house a home again. You made me remember what it's like to have someone to talk to at the end of a long day. And I've been so busy feeling guilty about it that I never said thank you. You don't have to thank me for doing what I agreed to do." "That's exactly my point. You went so far beyond our agreement, it's not even recognizable anymore." He reached across the table and took her hand, feeling the ring under his fingers. "I gave you this as a symbol of family, but I think it means more than that now. At least, I want it to." Her breath caught. "What are you saying?" I'm saying that somewhere along the way, this stopped being an arrangement and became something real. I don't know what to call it yet. I don't know if I'm ready to call it anything. But I know I don't want you to feel like you're on probation anymore. I know I want you to stay not because you have nowhere else to go, but because this is where you belong. And what about Sarah? Sarah's in the past. She'll always be in the past, and I'll always love the memory of who we were together. But you're here now, present tense, real, and I think— He swallowed hard. I think maybe there's room for both. If you're willing to be patient with me while I figure out how to do this. Nora's eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling. I can be patient. I've had a lot of practice. I know you have, too much practice. You shouldn't have to wait anymore, shouldn't have to prove yourself. He squeezed her hand. So I'm making you a promise. From now on, you're not the woman who came after. You're the woman who's here, the one Lily loves, the one who— He stopped, the words too big to say yet. The one who what? The one who matters. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was all he could manage. To both of us. She stood slowly, still holding his hand, and moved around the table. For a moment they just stood there, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her eyes, could smell the lavender soap she used, could feel the warmth of her presence. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me, for choosing me, for making me believe I'm worth choosing. You are worth choosing. Don't ever doubt that. Then she did something that surprised them both. She leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. It was brief, chaste, nothing inappropriate, but it felt like a promise of things unspoken, possibilities waiting to unfold. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed. I should go to bed. Morning comes early. Nora. Give me time too, she said softly. To believe this is real, to trust it won't be taken away. I want to believe, Caleb, but I'm scared. So am I. She smiled at that, tentative but genuine. Then we'll be scared together. That's something, isn't it? It's everything. She left him standing in the warm kitchen, and Caleb realized his hands were shaking. He'd crossed a threshold tonight, acknowledged something he'd been fighting for weeks. The arrangement had become real. The boundaries had blurred. And standing on the other side of his careful distance, he could finally see what had been there all along. Not replacement, not substitution. Just Nora. Brave, broken, beautiful Nora, who'd traveled 2,000 miles in rags and stayed to build something worth having. And maybe, just maybe, he was ready to build it with her. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of late winter day that hinted at spring's eventual arrival. Caleb woke to the smell of coffee and found Nora already up, humming softly as she worked. When she turned and saw him, her smile was different than before, warmer, more open, less guarded. Good morning, she said, and the simple greeting felt weighted with everything they'd acknowledged the night before. Morning. He poured coffee, noting how comfortable this felt. How right. Sleep well? Better than I have in years. She handed him a plate of eggs. Lily's still asleep. I thought we might let her rest a bit longer. They ate together in companionable silence, and Caleb marveled at how much had changed in 3 months. The woman who'd stepped off the stage on Christmas Eve, thin and exhausted and weary, had transformed into someone vital. She'd filled out slightly, no longer quite so gaunt. Color had returned to her cheeks, and her eyes, which had been so carefully blank, now showed emotion freely. "What are you thinking?" she asked, catching him staring. "That you look different than you did when you arrived." Different how? Alive. The word came out before he could filter it. You looked half dead on Christmas Eve. Now you look like someone who's remembered how to live. Her hand went to the wooden flowers she'd pinned to her dress. I feel different, like I've been asleep for years and finally woke up. I know the feeling. They shared a look of perfect understanding, two people who'd been merely surviving, finally remembering what it meant to live. And in that moment, Caleb knew with absolute certainty that whatever this was becoming, it was worth the risk, worth the fear, worth letting go of the past enough to embrace the present, worth choosing her again and again until she finally believed she deserved to be chosen. The shift between them was gradual but unmistakable, like ice melting in the first warmth of spring. Over the following weeks, Caleb found himself seeking Nora's company in ways that had nothing to do with necessity. He'd linger over morning coffee, listening to her talk about the book she was reading with Lily. He'd ask her opinion on ranch decisions he'd always made alone. He'd find excuses to be in the kitchen while she cooked, drawn by something more than the smell of baking bread. And Nora bloomed under the attention. She laughed more readily, her smiles coming quicker and lasting longer. She'd brush against him in passing, small touches that felt deliberate. She'd meet his eyes across the table and hold his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Lily noticed, of course. Children always did. "Papa smiles at Mama Nora a lot now," she announced one evening at supper, her tone matter-of-fact. "Like he used to smile at the pictures of my first mama." Caleb nearly choked on his coffee. Nora's face flushed pink, but she didn't look displeased. "Does that bother you, sweetheart?" Nora asked gently. Lily considered this with the seriousness of a 6-year-old philosopher. "No, it makes me happy, because it means Papa's not so sad anymore. And it means you're staying forever, right?" "Right," Caleb said before Nora could hedge. "She's staying forever." The certainty in his voice surprised even him, but it felt true. Somewhere along the way, the question had shifted from whether Nora would stay to how they would build a life together. The details remained murky, but the destination was clear. That Sunday, Caleb made a decision. When they drove into town for church, he didn't help Nora down from the wagon with his usual polite distance. Instead, he took her hand and kept holding it as they walked toward the church, Lily skipping ahead. The whispers started immediately. Caleb felt eyes on them from every direction, saw Margaret Hendricks' mouth fall open in shock, but he didn't let go. If anything, he held Nora's hand tighter, making a statement the whole town could witness. Inside the church, they sat in their usual pew. Caleb was acutely aware of every glance, every murmur. Beside him, Nora sat straight-backed and dignified, but he could feel the tension in her frame. When the service began and they stood to sing, he shifted closer until their shoulders touched. A tiny gesture, but deliberate. After the service, instead of hurrying to the wagon as they usually did, Caleb steered them toward the small gathering of families that always lingered to socialize. Nora's hand tensed in his, but she didn't pull away. "Caleb!" Thomas Pruitt approached with his wife Emma, a kind-faced woman who'd always been friendly. "Mrs. Hale. Good to see you both." "Thomas." "Emma." Caleb nodded. "I wanted to extend an invitation," Emma said, addressing Nora directly. "We're having a quilting circle at our house next Thursday. I'd be honored if you'd join us." Nora's surprise was evident. That's very kind. Thank you." "It's about time this town remembered its manners," Emma said pointedly, her gaze sweeping the gathered crowd. "You're one of us now, whether certain people like it or not." Margaret Hendricks, standing nearby, stiffened visibly. Emma Pruitt, You hardly think at all, Margaret, and that's the problem." Emma's voice remained pleasant, but steel ran beneath. "Mrs. Hale has done nothing but care for that child and keep a good home. If that's not worthy of respect, I don't know what is." A ripple went through the crowd. For months, Margaret had held court over the town's opinion, and no one had challenged her. Now Emma Pruitt, well-respected, church-going Emma, was drawing a line in the dirt. "Well, I never," Margaret sputtered. "No, you never do," Caleb said quietly. "You never give people the benefit of doubt. You never show Christian charity. You never look past surfaces to see what's actually there." He kept his voice level, but every word landed like a hammer. "Nora came here on Christmas Eve looking like she'd been through hell. And you want to know why? Because she'd spent 3 years caring for her dying husband, using every cent she had to buy medicine that didn't work, selling everything she owned to pay doctors who couldn't help. She arrived here with nothing because she'd given everything to someone else. That's not shame, Mrs. Hendricks. That's sacrifice. That's honor. That's worth." The crowd had gone silent. Nora stood frozen beside him, her eyes wide. "And for the past 3 months," Caleb continued, "she's taken a broken little girl and helped her heal. She's turned my house back into a home. She's worked from before dawn until after dark, asking for nothing, giving everything. So you can keep your gossip and your judgment. I know what I see. I see a woman of character and strength. I see someone who's earned her place through sheer determination. I see..." He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "What do you see, Mr. Rourke?" Margaret's voice dripped with false sweetness. Caleb looked at Nora, really looked at her, and the truth rose up so clearly he wondered how he'd missed it for so long. "I see my future," he said simply, "if she'll have it." Nora's breath caught audibly. Around them the silence deepened, every ear straining to hear. "Caleb," she whispered, "what are you—" "I'm saying what should have been said weeks ago." He turned to face her fully, still holding her hand. "I'm saying you're not here because I needed help. You're here because you belong here. With me. With Lily. With us. But Sarah would want me to be happy. Would want Lily to be happy. And we are, Nora. Because of you." He squeezed her hand. "I'm not asking you to replace her. I'm asking you to build something new with me. Something that honors what was while embracing what is." Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks, in front of the whole town, especially in front of the whole town. So everyone knows. So there's no more question about your place or your worth. He raised his voice slightly. "Nora Hale is my family. She's Lily's mother in every way that matters. And anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." The challenge hung in the air. Margaret Hendricks looked like she'd swallowed a lemon, but significantly she said nothing. A few people shifted uncomfortably, but several others were nodding approval. Emma Pruitt was beaming. "Well said, Caleb," Thomas called out. "Well said indeed." Others echoed the sentiment, voices rising in a chorus of support that drowned out any lingering whispers. And standing in the churchyard with the whole town watching, Caleb drew Nora closer and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You're not second choice," he murmured against her hair. "You're the choice. The only one that matters." She clung to him, her tears soaking into his shirt. "I don't know how to believe that." "Then I'll keep saying it until you do. However long it takes." Lily appeared at their side, wrapping her small arms around both of them. "Does this mean Mama Nora's staying forever and ever?" "Forever and ever," Caleb confirmed. "Good." Lily's satisfaction was absolute. "Can we go home now? I'm hungry." The laughter that rippled through the crowd was warm, breaking the tension. As they walked back to the wagon, several families stopped them to offer congratulations or invitations. The tide had turned, not completely. There would always be Margaret Hendricks types, but enough to matter. On the ride home, Lily chattered excitedly about the scene, reenacting it with dramatic flair. But Nora was quiet, staring at her hands in her lap. "Having second thoughts?" Caleb asked softly. "Wondering if I'm dreaming," she replied. "Things like this don't happen to me. People don't choose me. They tolerate me, or use me, or leave me, but they don't choose me. I'm choosing you, every day, starting now and not stopping." He kept his eyes on the road. "Question is, are you choosing me back?" "I chose you the moment I stepped off that stage on Christmas Eve," she said. "I just didn't think I was allowed to say it." Something in his chest unlocked completely. For months he'd been circling this truth, approaching and retreating, caught between grief and guilt and fear. But sitting on the wagon with Nora beside him and Lily humming behind them, he finally understood what Sarah had been trying to tell him in those letters. Love wasn't finite, hearts weren't either. You could honor the past while building a future. You could grieve what you'd lost while embracing what you'd found. It wasn't betrayal, it was survival. It was choosing life over death, hope over despair, connection over isolation. It was exactly what Sarah would have wanted. When they reached the ranch, Lily ran ahead to check on the chickens, leaving Caleb and Nora alone by the wagon. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard, and somewhere a meadowlark called its sweet, descending song. "I need to tell you something," Nora said, her voice uncertain. "All right. When I married Thomas, I thought it was my only escape. And for the first year, it was better than my stepfather's house. But then Thomas started drinking, and when he drank, he got mean. He never hit me where it would show, always careful about that. And he'd apologize after, swear he'd stop, beg me not to leave." She twisted Sarah's ring on her finger. "When he got sick, part of me felt guilty for being relieved, but another part, the part I'm most ashamed of, was terrified he'd recover, that I'd be trapped again." "That's not something to be ashamed of, isn't it? What kind of wife thinks that way?" "The kind who was being hurt, the kind who wanted to survive." Caleb took her hands. Did you love him? At first, or I thought I did, but he killed whatever feelings I had, one cruel word at a time. By the end, I felt nothing but fear and exhaustion. She met his eyes. I tell you this because you deserve to know. I'm not some innocent who's never been touched. I was married for 3 years to a man who made me wish I'd never been born. That's what I brought with me in that carpet bag. 3 years of learning to make myself small and quiet and invisible. 3 years of believing I deserved nothing better. And now? Now I'm learning that maybe I was wrong. That maybe I deserve kindness and respect and... She stopped, the word catching. And what? And love, she whispered. But it's terrifying, Caleb, because I don't know how to trust it. Don't know how to believe it won't be taken away or turned against me. Till Caleb understood that fear intimately. He'd felt it himself, afraid to care too much because loss hurt too badly. But standing here with Nora, seeing the courage it took for her to be vulnerable, he knew what he had to do. Come with me, he said. He led her toward the small copse of trees behind the house, to the place where Sarah was buried. The grave was simple, a wooden cross he'd carved himself, her name and dates burned into the wood. Wildflowers grew around it, self-seeded and untended but beautiful nonetheless. Nora stopped at the edge of the small clearing. Caleb, I don't think... I need to do this. He stepped forward, pulling her gently with him. Sarah, this is Nora. She's been caring for Lily, caring for both of us, really, and I think... His voice cracked. I think you'd like her. She's strong and patient and kind. She makes Lily laugh. She makes the house feel warm again. She's nothing like you, but that's not a bad thing. It's just different. Nora's hand trembled in his. I loved you, Caleb continued, his throat tight. I'll always love the memory of what we had. But you're gone, Sarah, and I'm still here. Lily's still here, and we need to keep living. I think that's what you wanted. What you asked for in those letters. He paused. So I'm telling you now, I'm choosing Nora, not instead of you, alongside the memory of you. And I hope, God, I hope that's all right. The only sound was wind rustling through leaves and Nora's quiet crying. Caleb stood there feeling stripped bare, having said aloud what he'd barely been able to admit to himself. Finally, Nora spoke. She was lucky to have someone love her so much. I was lucky to have her at all, even for the short time we had. He turned to face Nora fully. But I'm choosing to be lucky again. If you'll let me, I don't know how to be loved properly. Thomas broke something in me. Then we'll figure it out together. I'm not exactly an expert myself these days. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears. All I know is that when I think about the future now, you're in it. You and Lily, building a life, building a family, making something good out of all the broken pieces we've both been carrying. I'm still scared. So am I. But maybe we can be scared together and do it anyway. She laughed through her tears. You said that before, about being scared together. It's still true. Probably always will be. He leaned his forehead against hers. I can't promise everything will be perfect. I can't promise I won't have bad days where grief hits hard. I can't promise the town will ever completely accept you, though I think we made good progress today. But I can promise I'll choose you every single day until you believe you're worth choosing. And if that takes years, then I've got years. He pulled back enough to look into her eyes. Nora Hale, I'm asking you properly now, in front of Sarah's grave, so she knows too. Will you really be my wife? Not just in name, not just for Lily's sake, but for real? Will you build a life with me? She stared at him, stunned. You're proposing. I suppose I am, doing it backward and probably all wrong, but yes, in a graveyard. Where better, starting from honest truth instead of pretty lies? He managed a shaky smile. So what do you say? Will you have me, grief and complications and all? For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then slowly, deliberately, she lifted her hand, the one wearing Sarah's ring, and placed it over his heart. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. He kissed her then, soft and tentative, a promise of things to come. She kissed him back with a fierceness that surprised them both. 3 years of loneliness and fear pouring into that single contact. When they finally broke apart, both were shaking. "We should tell Lily," Nora said, breathless. "She'll be insufferable. She's been planning this for weeks." "Has she now?" "You think that child hasn't been matchmaking? She's been leaving us alone together every chance she gets." Caleb laughed. "She's 6 going on 60. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and sure enough, Lily was waiting on the porch with a knowing smile. "Did Papa ask you to marry him for real?" she demanded. "How did you—" Nora started. "Because he took you to Mama Sarah's grave. He always goes there when he needs to figure out important things." Lily bounced with excitement. "So, did you say yes?" "I said yes." The shriek of joy that followed probably carried all the way to salvation. Lily threw herself at Nora, then at Caleb, then tried to hug them both at once, talking a mile a minute about weddings and dresses and whether they could have cake. "We'll figure all that out," Caleb assured her. "But first, I think Nora and I need to have a conversation about what we're actually doing here." "You're getting married," Lily said, as if it were obvious. "Yes, but there's more to it than that." He looked at Nora. "We should probably talk about expectations, about what we both want this to look like." They sat at the kitchen table after Lily finally wore herself out and went to play. Caleb poured coffee, gathering his thoughts. "I don't want you to feel obligated," he began, "to anything. We can take this as slow as you need." "What do you want?" Nora asked. "Honestly, I want what we've been building. You and me and Lily, being a family. I want to wake up to coffee already made and go to bed knowing someone else is there. I want conversations at the end of the day and someone to share decisions with. I want—" He stopped, heat rising in his face. "What?" "I want more than that eventually, but I understand if you need time. After Thomas made me afraid of intimacy," she said quietly. "But he didn't kill the part of me that wants connection, that wants to be held and touched with kindness instead of anger." Color rose in her cheeks. "I may need patience and gentleness, but I'm not opposed to being a wife in all ways, when the time is right." The air between them felt charged. Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. "Then we'll know when the time is right. No pressure, no expectations beyond what we both want." He paused. "Should we have a real wedding or just go to the judge in salvation? What would you prefer?" "I asked you." She smiled. "I've never had a real wedding. Thomas and I went to a judge on a Tuesday afternoon with 2 strangers as witnesses. It felt like signing a business contract." "Then you should have a real one. Church, if you want. Witnesses who actually care. A dress that's not threadbare." He squeezed her hand. "You deserve to be celebrated, Nora." Tears welled up again. "You keep saying things like that." "Because they're true, and because I'm going to keep saying them until you believe me." Over the next few weeks, word spread through Salvation and the surrounding ranches. Emma Pruitt made good on her offer, inviting Nora to the quilting circle where the women of the town welcomed her with varying degrees of warmth. Some remained cool, following Margaret Hendricks' lead, but others were genuinely kind, curious about this woman who'd captured Caleb Rourke's heart. "They asked how we met," Nora reported one evening, amused. "I told them the truth. Mail-order bride showed up on Christmas Eve in rags. You should have seen their faces." "Did Margaret have anything to say?" "Oh, she had plenty to say, but Emma shut her down beautifully, pointed out that Ruth in the Bible was also a stranger who came from nothing and became a great woman." Nora grinned. Margaret couldn't argue with Scripture. Caleb pulled her close, marveling at how natural it felt now to have her in his arms. "I'm proud of you for going, for holding your ground." "I'm learning from the best." She kissed his jaw. "You've been showing me how to stand up for myself since Christmas." "You always knew how. You just needed permission to believe you could." They set the wedding for the first Sunday in April, giving springtime to arrive in earnest. Nora spent her evening sewing a dress from fabric Caleb insisted on buying, a soft blue that matched her eyes. Emma Pruitt helped with the fitting and even brought over lace from her own wedding dress to trim the collar. Lily was beside herself with excitement, practicing her role as flower girl with such dedication that Caleb worried she'd wear herself out before the actual day. She picked wildflowers daily, making bouquets that filled the house with color and fragrance. "Are you nervous?" Nora asked the night before the wedding. They sat together on the porch, watching stars emerge in the deepening dusk. Terrified, Caleb admitted. Not of marrying you, of everything it represents. Moving forward, letting go. We don't have to let go completely. We can carry the past with us, just not let it dictate the future. She leaned against his shoulder. Sarah's part of our story, but she's not the whole story. No, the whole story includes you now. He kissed the top of her head. And that makes it better. Different, but better. The wedding day dawned clear and warm, the kind of perfect spring morning that felt like a benediction. The church was nearly full, more people than Caleb had expected come to witness this unlikely union. The minister, Reverend Michaels, had agreed to perform the ceremony despite some parishioners' objections. Caleb stood at the front of the church, Thomas Pruitt beside him as best man, and tried not to think about the last time he'd stood here. The last wedding he'd attended had been Sarah's funeral. Today was supposed to be different. Was different. But the echoes remained. Then the doors opened and Lily appeared, scattering flower petals with serious concentration. Behind her came Nora on Emma Pruitt's arm. Emma had insisted on giving the bride away, saying every woman deserved that honor. But Caleb saw only Nora. She wore the blue dress with its lace collar, her dark hair swept up and pinned with wild flowers. Sarah's ring still graced her finger, but around her neck she wore the wooden flower he'd carved, suspended on a ribbon. She was smiling, radiant with joy and terror in equal measure. When she reached the altar, Emma placed Nora's hand in Caleb's and whispered something that made Nora laugh quietly. Then Emma took her seat, and Reverend Michaels began. The service passed in a blur of familiar words and unfamiliar feelings. Caleb heard himself make promises, heard Nora's voice shake as she repeated her vows. When the minister asked for the rings, Thomas handed over a simple gold band Caleb had bought in Salvation, meant to sit beside Sarah's ring on Nora's finger. This ring symbolizes my promise, Caleb said as he slipped it on. To choose you, to honor you, to build a life worth living with you. Nora's eyes were bright with tears as she placed a matching band on his finger. And I promise to believe I'm worth choosing, to trust your love, to be brave enough to build that life beside you. Then by the power vested in me, Reverend Michaels said warmly, I pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride. He did, carefully and sweetly, aware of Lily's delighted squeal and the congregation's applause. When they broke apart, Nora was crying openly, but she was smiling too. We did it, she whispered. We did it, he agreed. No going back now. Wouldn't want to even if I could. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. Several families had contributed food, setting up tables in the churchyard for a proper wedding breakfast. Caleb watched Nora move through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes, and saw how differently people treated her now. She was no longer the desperate woman in rags. She was Mrs. Rourke, beloved of one of their own, mother to Lily. She'd earned her place through time and perseverance. Margaret Hendricks approached eventually, her expression sour. Well, Caleb, you've made your choice. I hope you don't live to regret it. The only thing I regret, Margaret, is not making it sooner. He met her eyes steadily. Nora's the best thing to happen to my family in 2 years. And if you can't see that, the problem's with you, not her. Margaret huffed and walked away, but her power over the town's opinion had waned. Others had seen the truth, had watched Nora transform from broken stranger to beloved wife, had witnessed real love growing from impossible circumstances. As the afternoon wore on, guests began departing. Finally, only Caleb, Nora, and Lily remained, gathering the last dishes and walking toward their wagon. Can I sit in back? Lily asked. I'm tired. Of course, sweetheart. Nora helped her up, tucking a blanket around her small form. They drove home in comfortable silence, Lily dozing behind them. When the ranch came into view, Caleb felt something settle in his chest. This was home. Truly home. Not just the place where he worked and slept, but the place where his family lived. As he helped Nora down from the wagon, he noticed something near the cabin steps. Bright marigolds were blooming in a patch of earth he could have sworn was barren just days ago. What? He stepped closer, confused. Then he remembered. Sarah had planted marigolds the first spring they'd lived here, delighted when they reseeded themselves and came back year after year. But they hadn't bloomed since she died, the ground too hard and cold. Now they blazed orange and gold in the late afternoon sun, vibrant and alive. "Mama Nora, look!" Lily had woken and tumbled from the wagon, running to kneel beside the flowers. "They're so pretty." Nora knelt too, touching the petals with reverence. Marigolds. They mean optimism and new beginnings in the language of flowers. Caleb stood frozen, staring at those impossible blooms. It felt like a sign, like Sarah's blessing manifesting in the world, like permission granted from beyond. "Papa?" Lily looked up at him. "Why are you crying?" He hadn't realized he was. He wiped his eyes roughly, then knelt beside his daughter and his wife, his family, in the warm dirt. "Because sometimes beautiful things happen when you least expect them," he said. "Sometimes life surprises you. Sometimes you get second chances." Nora took his hand, understanding in her eyes. Together they looked at the flowers. Sarah's flowers, blooming again after 2 years of silence. Not replacing the past, just making room for the future. "We should go inside," Nora said softly. "It's getting late." Caleb stood and offered her his hand. She took it without hesitation. Lily grabbed both their free hands, creating a linked chain of 3. Together, they walked into the cabin. Their cabin. Their home. The door closed behind them with a gentle sound, shutting out the cold and the doubt and the pain of the past. Inside, lamplight glowed warm, the smell of home. Coffee and bread and life lived together, wrapped around them like an embrace. Caleb looked at Nora, really looked at her, and saw not the desperate woman in rags who'd appeared on Christmas Eve, but the strong, courageous woman she'd always been underneath. The woman who'd survived poverty and abuse and loss, who'd traveled 2,000 miles on faith alone, who'd loved his daughter with fierce devotion, who'd chosen him despite every reason to protect her heart. "Welcome home, Mrs. Rourke," he said. She smiled, that radiant smile that transformed her entire face. "I've been home since Christmas, Mr. Rourke. I just didn't know I was allowed to stay." "You're allowed. You're wanted. You're loved." He pulled her close, feeling Lily wrap herself around both their legs. "And you're never leaving. None of us are. We're home. Finally, completely home." Outside, the marigolds swayed in the evening breeze, bright against the darkening earth. Above, stars began to emerge, distant and eternal. The wind carried the scent of spring across the Wyoming plains. New growth, fresh possibilities, life beginning again. And in the small cabin where grief had once held dominion, 3 hearts beat in rhythm. 3 souls found rest. 3 broken pieces made whole. The man who'd lost everything had found something new. The woman who'd expected nothing had received everything. The child who'd feared abandonment had gained a mother who would never leave. They were family now, chosen, not by circumstance, but by love. Built not on perfection, but on honesty and courage, and the simple decision to keep trying. It wasn't the story Caleb had imagined writing, wasn't the happy ending Sarah had dreamed of, but it was real and true and worth every moment of fear it had taken to reach. And standing in the lamplight with his wife in his arms and his daughter at his feet, Caleb Rourke understood at last what Sarah had known all along. Love wasn't finite. Hearts could hold room for yesterday and today and tomorrow all at once. You could honor the past while embracing the future. You could grieve and heal simultaneously. You could be broken and whole in the same breath. You could see worth in rags and choose love over fear. You could come home. They had.